There's something about Savannah that feels different from other cities. The air sits heavier here, thick with humidity and something else, something that makes visitors glance over their shoulders when walking cobblestone streets at dusk. We all know Savannah has a reputation for being haunted. Countless ghost tours win through its historic squares every night. But what most people don't realize is that beneath the commercialized spookiness lies something genuinely dark. These aren't friendly spirits posing for photographs. They're documented cases of physical attacks, psychological breakdowns, and unexplainable phenomena that have been occurring for decades, some for centuries. Doesn't make sense, does it? A beautiful southern city, famous for its architecture and hospitality, hiding locations so cursed that even skeptical investigators refuse to return. Yet, that's exactly what Savannah is. A city built on layer upon layer of tragedy, where the dead don't just linger, they act. Today we're exploring 10 of Savannah's most cursed locations, places where something went terribly wrong and never stopped. Lock your doors, because after hearing these stories, you'll understand why some visitors to Savannah check out of their hotels in the middle of the night and never come back. Let's start with the most infamous. A building so dangerous the city has tried multiple times to demolish it, only to have workers refuse to finish the job. The Sorrelweed House stands at 6 West Harris Street, a Greek revival mansion that looks like something from a Southern Gothic novel. Beautiful, elegant, and profoundly wrong. Built in 1840 by shipping merchant Francis Sorrel, the house was a symbol of wealth and status. But behind its columns and ironwork balconies, something terrible happened. Something that left a stain the building has never been able to wash away. The story begins with Matilda Sorrel, Francis's wife, who by all accounts was unhappy in her marriage. In 1860, she was found dead at the bottom of the main staircase, her neck broken. The official cause was ruled an accident, a tragic fall. But servants whispered about what they'd seen in the weeks before her death, Francis's increasingly violent temper, Matilda's unexplained bruises, and worst of all, Francis's obsession with Molly, an enslaved woman who worked in the house. Less than 2 weeks after Matilda's death, Molly was found hanging in the carriage house behind the main building. Again, it was ruled a suicide, but those who knew Molly said she had been terrified in the days before her death, claiming that Matilda's ghost was following her, watching her, waiting. Whether Molly took her own life out of guilt or fear, or whether someone else made it look like suicide, was never determined. What is certain is that from that moment on, the Sorrelweed House became a place where people didn't want to work, stay, or even visit after dark. Over the next century and a half, the building passed through multiple owners, none keeping it for long. Some left after a few months, others lasted a year or two, but all eventually fled, often refusing to explain why. In the 1980s, when the house was being used as office space, employees began reporting incidents. Files would be scattered across floors overnight despite locked doors. Cold spots appeared in specific rooms regardless of season, and most disturbing, people reported being touched, shoved, or grabbed by invisible hands. Always in the same locations: the main staircase where Matilda died, and the carriage house where Molly was found. In 1997, paranormal investigators were granted access to conduct a formal study. What they documented went far beyond typical ghost stories. Multiple team members reported feeling physically ill in the carriage house, experiencing sudden nausea, dizziness, and overwhelming dread. Camera equipment malfunctioned repeatedly, batteries draining within minutes despite being fully charged. And in one particularly disturbing incident, an investigator was physically pushed down the stairs in the carriage house, suffering a sprained ankle and contusions, despite being completely alone at the time. The investigator, a woman named Rebecca Torres, later stated in an interview, "I've investigated dozens of allegedly haunted locations, and I've never experienced anything like the Sorrelweed House. Whatever is there isn't residual energy or a harmless presence. It's angry, it's active, and it wants to hurt people. I will never go back. The house is now a museum offering ghost tours, but incidents continue. Visitors regularly report being scratched or pushed, particularly women touring alone. In 2015, a tourist had to be treated by paramedics after collapsing in the carriage house, claiming something had wrapped around her throat and squeezed. She had visible marks on her neck, photographed by other tour members, but no rational explanation was ever provided. The Sorrelweed house isn't just haunted, it's cursed, a place where violence from the past continues to manifest in the present. But if you think one cursed mansion is terrifying, wait until you hear about the park where children vanish. Colonial Park Cemetery occupies an entire block in Savannah's historic district, surrounded by brick walls and iron gates. Established in 1750, it served as the city's primary burial ground for over a century, and it's estimated that more than 10,000 people are interred within its walls. But the official grave markers account for only a fraction of that number. The rest were buried in unmarked graves, mass pits used during yellow fever epidemics, or simply lost to time and poor record-keeping. Walking through Colonial Park during the day, it's peaceful, even beautiful, with ancient oaks shading crumbling tombstones and Spanish moss hanging like curtains. But at night, something shifts. The cemetery has been locked to the public after dark since the 1960s, officially to prevent vandalism. Unofficially, it's because people kept disappearing. Between 1964 and 1987, at least 7 people entered Colonial Park Cemetery after hours and were never seen again. Most were teenagers or young adults who climbed the walls on dares or as part of local ghost hunting expeditions. They would enter in groups, and sometimes one person would simply vanish while the others weren't looking. No sounds, no struggle, just there one moment and gone the next. The most documented case occurred in October 1979, when 4 college students from Savannah State University climbed into the cemetery around midnight. According to the 3 survivors, they were walking along one of the paths when their friend, a young man named Thomas Riddick, stopped to examine a tombstone. When they turned back to call him, he was gone. They searched for over an hour, calling his name, checking behind every monument and tree. Eventually, they panicked and called police. A search involving dozens of officers, dogs, and eventually helicopters continued for 3 days. Thomas Riddick was never found. No trace of him, no clothing, no signs of struggle, nothing. He simply ceased to exist. The police investigation concluded he must have climbed back out and left the area, perhaps disoriented or playing a prank. But his family and friends insisted Thomas would never do that. And more importantly, the cemetery walls are high and covered in iron spikes. Climbing out would have been difficult and dangerous, and would have left marks or torn clothing. None were found. In the years since, others have reported near misses, moments where someone in their group seemed to fade or become transparent before snapping back to solidity, or experiences of being separated from companions despite being in an open area with clear sightlines. Park rangers who patrol the perimeter at night refuse to enter, even during emergencies. One former ranger, speaking anonymously, described hearing voices from inside the cemetery, children's voices, singing or laughing, but when he looked through the gate with a flashlight, the cemetery was empty. He also noted that certain sections of the cemetery are always colder than others, even in summer, and that animals refuse to enter those areas. Dogs will pull away, birds won't perch on the trees, and even insects seem to avoid specific graves. What makes Colonial Park's curse particularly insidious is its targeting. Of the 7 confirmed disappearances, 6 were young people under the age of 25 and 5 were men. Some researchers have suggested this pattern indicates something predatory, an entity or force that specifically hunts certain types of victims. Others point to the cemetery's history, noting that many of those buried there died young, during epidemics or in childbirth, and perhaps their spirits seek company or revenge. Whatever the cause, Colonial Park Cemetery remains a place where people enter and don't always leave. A cursed ground where the dead outnumber the living by thousands, and where the boundary between the two is dangerously thin. But cemeteries are expected to be haunted. They're places of death, after all. What about a place that should be safe, a place of healing? Savannah's Candler Hospital, one of the oldest continuously operating hospitals in the United States, has a reputation that makes even its own staff nervous. Founded in 1804, Candler has seen more than 2 centuries of suffering, treating victims of wars, epidemics, and accidents. Tens of thousands have died within its walls, and according to nurses and doctors who've worked there, many of them never left. The hospital's reputation centers on the 4th floor, particularly the East Wing, which was used during the Civil War as a surgical ward. In that era, anesthesia was limited, antibiotics didn't exist, and surgical techniques were primitive. Soldiers underwent amputations, extractions, and experimental procedures while fully conscious or only partially sedated. The survival rate was less than 50%. Today, the 4th floor East Wing is used for storage and administrative offices, but staff avoid it whenever possible. Those who must work there report constant feelings of being watched, hearing footsteps in empty corridors, and most disturbingly, the sounds of screaming. Not distant or faint, but loud, clear, the sounds of men in agony, as if the surgeries are still happening just out of sight. In 2008, a night shift nurse named Patricia Holbrook was retrieving supplies from the 4th floor when she heard what she described as a chorus of screaming men, dozens of voices overlapping, begging for help. She ran from the floor and refused to return. When supervisors reviewed security footage, it showed Patricia standing frozen in the hallway for nearly 3 minutes, not moving, as if listening to something. But the audio pickup on the cameras recorded nothing unusual. Patricia later transferred to another hospital and declined to discuss the incident further. Other staff members have reported being touched or grabbed in the 4th floor corridors, feeling hands on their shoulders or arms despite being alone. Medical equipment turns on by itself, particularly in storage rooms that once served as surgical theaters. And visitors to patients on other floors have reported seeing men in Civil War-era uniforms standing in doorways or at the ends of halls, watching silently before fading away. But the hospital's curse extends beyond the 4th floor. In the basement, where the morgue was located until the 1970s, maintenance workers report hearing knocking from inside the old cold storage units, despite them being empty and disconnected from power. One worker opened a unit to investigate the noise and later claimed he saw a woman's face pressed against the inside of the door, eyes wide, mouth open in a scream, even though the unit had been empty seconds before. He quit the same day. Candler Hospital continues to operate, treating thousands of patients every year, but the stories persist. Patients recovering on certain floors report seeing figures standing by their beds at night, nurses who don't respond when called and disappear when the lights are turned on. Some have described waking to find their IV lines disconnected or their blankets removed, only to have night staff insist no one had been in their rooms. The hospital administration doesn't acknowledge the phenomena publicly, but privately, staff members are told which rooms to avoid assigning to patients when possible, particularly rooms where unexplained deaths have occurred. And there have been many. Statistically, hospitals see deaths regularly. But Candler has a disproportionate number of unexplained cardiac events, sudden respiratory failures, and cases where patients simply stop breathing for no medical reason, particularly at night, particularly in specific rooms. Whether these are coincidences, the result of the hospital's age and the complexity of its patient population, or something more sinister, is a question the hospital doesn't want to explore too deeply. After all, how do you treat a curse? But hospitals, like cemeteries, are places we associate with death. What about a place that was meant to be beautiful, a public space for families? Savannah's squares are one of its defining features. 22 tree-shaded parks arranged in a geometric grid throughout the historic district. But one square is different. One is cursed. Madison Square, located at the intersection of Bull Street and Macon Street, looks peaceful during the day. Families picnic under the oaks, tourists photograph the monuments, and the sounds of traffic and conversation create a comforting urban hum. But as evening approaches and shadows lengthen, something changes. People start to leave, often without quite knowing why. They feel uncomfortable, watched, or simply develop an urgent need to be somewhere else. Those who stay after dark often regret it. Madison Square sits on ground that has seen more violence than any other location in Savannah. Before the square was established in 1837, the site was used as a dueling ground, and later as a mass grave during the yellow fever epidemic of 1820. Hundreds were buried in shallow pits, many without coffins or markers. When the square was being constructed, workers reported finding bones constantly, remains that were simply reburied or, in some cases, left in place and built over. The square is quite literally built on top of the dead. The curse manifests in different ways. Some visitors report being followed by shadow figures that move through the trees, always at the edge of vision but never directly visible. Others describe sudden temperature drops, localized cold spots that appear and disappear without explanation, even on hot summer nights. Most disturbing are the accounts of physical contact, people being pushed, tripped, or having their hair pulled by invisible hands, almost always near the center of the square where the mass graves were located. In 2003, a family visiting Savannah set up a blanket in Madison Square for an evening picnic. The father later reported that his 6-year-old daughter began talking to someone he couldn't see, an older girl who she said was sad and wanted to go home. The daughter described the girl's clothing, a long white dress with buttons, and said the girl's face looked wrong, like she was very sick. When the father tried to move his daughter away from the spot, she began screaming that the girl was grabbing her, trying to pull her down into the ground. The father picked his daughter up and left immediately. The daughter had scratches on her arms and legs, thin, precise marks that hadn't been there minutes before. The family cut their vacation short and left Savannah the next day. Local psychics and paranormal investigators say Madison Square is a portal, a place where the barrier between the living and the dead is thin or broken. They warn against visiting after sunset and especially advise against bringing children, claiming that whatever inhabits the square is particularly interested in the young. Whether this is because children are more vulnerable, more open to supernatural influence, or simply because the entities were themselves children, victims of yellow fever who died young and angry, is unclear. What is clear is that Madison Square has a reputation, and locals avoid it after dark. The benches are empty at night, the paths deserted, and even homeless individuals who might otherwise seek shelter under the oaks choose to sleep elsewhere. Something claims Madison Square when the sun goes down, and whatever it is, it doesn't want company. But if you think Madison Square is bad, consider the Moon River Brewing Company, a restaurant and bar housed in one of Savannah's most violently haunted buildings. Located in a structure that dates back to 1821, the building has served many purposes over its 200-year history. It was originally the City Hotel, one of Savannah's first luxury accommodations, before becoming a coal warehouse, a lumber storage facility, and eventually a brewery and restaurant. But throughout all these incarnations, one thing has remained constant. People get hurt there. The building's reputation for violence began in the mid-1800s when the City Hotel was at its peak. Gambling, drinking, and fights were common in the hotel's bar, and at least 3 men are known to have died in brawls on the premises, killed in knife fights, or beaten to death. But the worst incident occurred in one of the upper floor rooms where a dispute between 2 guests over a card game resulted in one man being thrown from a balcony to his death. The man who committed the murder was never arrested, disappearing into the night, and the victim was buried in an unmarked grave. Since then, the building has been plagued by violent phenomena. When it was used as a coal warehouse in the early 1900s, workers reported being pushed off ladders or having heavy objects fall near them with no explanation. Several suffered serious injuries, broken bones, and concussions, and eventually, workers refused to go into certain sections of the building alone. In the 1990s, during renovations to convert the building into a brewery, construction crews experienced similar problems. Tools would go missing and reappear in dangerous locations, like at the top of stairs where someone might trip over them. Equipment would malfunction in ways that could cause injury, saws starting unexpectedly or scaffolding collapsing without cause. Most disturbing, workers reported feeling sudden, violent shoves, particularly near the staircase where the man had been thrown to his death over a century earlier. One worker fell down an entire flight of stairs and broke his arm, insisting he'd been pushed despite being alone at the time. When Moon River Brewing Company opened to the public, staff and customers began experiencing the phenomena firsthand. Glasses fly off shelves and shatter against walls, bottles explode without being touched, and chairs move on their own, sometimes with people still sitting in them. Customers have reported being scratched, slapped, or having their hair pulled, particularly women dining alone. In one particularly frightening incident in 2011, a bartender was closing up for the night when she felt someone grab her from behind, arms wrapping around her torso and squeezing. She screamed and fought, but there was no one there. When coworkers ran to help, they found her on the floor gasping for air, with bruises around her ribs in the shape of hands. She quit the next day. The building's third floor is the worst. It's closed to the public now, used only for storage, but staff members who must go up there report overwhelming feelings of anger and hostility. Some have described hearing whispers, insults, and threats in their ears, as if someone is standing right behind them. Others have felt sudden, intense rage wash over them for no reason, emotions that disappear as soon as they leave the floor. Paranormal investigators who've studied the building believe the violent deaths that occurred there have left what they call residual negative energy, a kind of emotional imprint that continues to influence the living. But some investigators go further, suggesting that the entities in the building aren't just echoes of past violence. They're active, malevolent presences that enjoy causing fear and harm. Whatever the explanation, Moon River Brewing Company remains one of Savannah's most dangerous haunted locations, a place where having a drink can result in far more than a hangover. But at least at Moon River, you're dealing with human spirits, ghosts of people who once lived and died. Our next location involves something potentially far worse. The Kehoe House at 123 Habersham Street is now a luxury bed and breakfast, but its history is one of tragedy and darkness. Built in 1892 by William Kehoe, a successful businessman, the house was meant to be a showcase of wealth and family success. But within a decade, 2 of the Kehoe children died in the house under mysterious circumstances. Official records say they died of illness, but neighborhood rumors told a different story. Whispers of accidents, of children playing in dangerous places, of a house that seemed to want to hurt them. After the deaths, the Kehoe family moved out, unable to live in a place with so many painful memories. The house passed through several owners over the next century, and with each family, strange incidents occurred. Children staying in the house would wake screaming from nightmares, describing a woman in Victorian clothing standing by their beds, watching them with hatred. Adults reported hearing children's laughter in empty rooms and finding toys in places they shouldn't be. Marbles rolling across floors, dolls moving from shelves to beds overnight. When the house was converted into a bed and breakfast in the 1990s, staff assumed the ghostly reputation would attract curious guests. And it did, but many of those guests didn't stay the full night. Visitors reported being woken by the feeling of being watched, seeing shadowy figures of children standing in corners, or hearing scratching sounds from inside the walls. Some guests reported finding their belongings moved or hidden, keys going missing then reappearing in strange places, clothes removed from suitcases and scattered across floors. But the most disturbing incidents involved children. Families staying at the Kehoe house with young children often reported their kids refusing to sleep in certain rooms, crying and insisting that other children were in there, children who wanted them to come play in bad places. Several parents reported finding their children standing at open windows or at the top of staircases, seemingly in a trance, as if being led toward danger. The bed and breakfast now has a policy of not booking families with children under 12 in certain rooms, though they won't explain why publicly. Staff members have reported that some rooms are simply trouble, and guests who stay in them frequently check out early, often in the middle of the night, leaving without asking for refunds or explanations. One former housekeeper described finding crosses drawn on walls in one of the third-floor rooms, scratched into the wallpaper from the inside, as if someone had been trying to ward something away. The marks were painted over, but they reappeared within weeks, deeper and more desperate. The Kehoe house continues to operate, and some guests report perfectly pleasant stays with no unusual experiences. But others leave terrified, convinced that the house is home to something that hates children, or worse, something that was once a child and wants others to join it in death. And then there's Wright Square, another of Savannah's historic parks, but one with a particularly grim distinction. It's the only square in Savannah where a boulder sits in the center, the Yamacraw boulder, marking the grave of Tomochichi, the Native American chief who helped James Oglethorpe establish Savannah. But beneath that boulder, and throughout the square, lie hundreds of forgotten bodies. Wright Square was the site of Savannah's first cemetery, and also served as the city's hanging ground for over a century. Public executions were held here, and the condemned were often buried right where they fell, with no marker and no ceremony. In 1820, a young woman named Alice Riley was hanged in Wright Square for the murder of her employer. Alice had been an indentured servant, and many believe she had been driven to murder by abuse and mistreatment. She was pregnant at the time of her execution, and legend says her last words were a curse, that she would haunt the square and drag others to their deaths. Whether or not Alice Riley spoke those words, Wright Square has since become a place where people die in strange ways. Unexplained accidents occur here more frequently than in any other Savannah square. People trip over nothing and suffer serious injuries. Branches fall from seemingly healthy trees and strike passers-by, and there have been multiple incidents of individuals collapsing suddenly from cardiac events despite having no history of heart problems. The death rate in Wright Square is statistically anomalous, and some researchers have tried to investigate, but no pattern has been definitively established beyond the location itself. Some visitors report seeing a woman in old-fashioned clothing walking through the square at dusk, her dress tattered and her face obscured. Those who followed her, thinking she might be lost or part of a historical reenactment, say she leads them toward the center of the square near the boulder before vanishing. Others report hearing a woman's voice crying or praying, sounds that seem to come from beneath the ground. Several psychics who visited Wright Square claim the earth itself is cursed, poisoned by the violence and injustice that occurred there, and that the spirits of those who were executed still linger, angry and seeking vengeance against the living. Wright Square is avoided by locals after dark, and tour guides often hurry their groups through quickly, unwilling to linger. The square feels heavier than others, the air thicker, and even skeptics admit there's something wrong about the place, a sense of sadness and anger that never quite fades. But perhaps the most infamous cursed location in all of Savannah is the Bonaventure Cemetery, immortalized in the book Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. Located on a bluff overlooking the Wilmington River, Bonaventure is hauntingly beautiful, with massive oaks draped in Spanish moss, ornate sculptures, and winding paths through elaborate Victorian graves. It's a tourist destination, visited by thousands every year who come to see famous graves and soak in the Gothic atmosphere. But Bonaventure has a darker side, one that the tour guides don't always mention. The cemetery sits on the site of a former plantation, Bonaventure Plantation, which burned to the ground in 1779. According to legend, the fire occurred during a lavish dinner party, and the guests, trapped by flames, continued eating and drinking as the house burned around them, preferring to die in celebration than flee in panic. Whether this story is true or apocryphal, the image of doomed aristocrats dining amid the flames has become part of Bonaventure's haunted reputation. Visitors report hearing music and laughter echoing through the cemetery at night, as if the ghostly party continues. Some say they've smelled smoke and food, roasting meat and wine, in areas where no fires or gatherings are taking place. But the cemetery's curse is more specific and more personal. There is a particular statue in Bonaventure, the Bird Girl statue that became famous after appearing on the cover of Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. The statue originally stood in a section of the cemetery associated with the Trosdal family, but it became so popular with tourists that it was eventually moved to a museum to prevent damage. However, the grave it once adorned is still there, and it's considered one of the most cursed spots in Savannah. People who visit the Trosdal grave and touch the ground where the statue stood report feeling sudden dread, nausea, and disorientation. Some have fainted. Others have reported being followed after leaving the cemetery, experiencing bad luck, illness, or accidents in the days following their visit. In 2016, a tourist took a handful of dirt from the grave as a souvenir. Within a week, she was involved in a car accident, lost her job, and her dog died unexpectedly. Desperate, she mailed the dirt back to the cemetery with a note apologizing and begging for the curse to be lifted. Whether or not the dirt was truly cursed, or whether the woman's string of bad luck was coincidence, is impossible to prove. But the stories persist, and the grave remains a place where visitors are warned not to touch, not to take anything, and not to linger after dark. Bonaventure Cemetery, for all its beauty, is a place where the dead are restless, and where curses, whether real or imagined, have a way of following you home. 10 locations, 10 curses, 10 places where Savannah's dark history refuses to stay buried. From the violent spirits of the Sorrel Weed House to the vanishing victims of Colonial Park Cemetery. From the screaming ghosts of Candler Hospital to the malevolent presence in Madison Square, each location reminds us that some places hold on to trauma, violence, and death in ways we don't fully understand. Savannah's beauty is undeniable, but beneath the Spanish moss and cobblestones lies a city where the past is never truly past, where the dead walk alongside the living, and where curses are more than folklore. They're documented, experienced, and feared. If you want to see more haunted locations brought to life, subscribe and let us know in the comments which cursed city we should explore next.